Good evening. I'd like to call to order the November 5th meeting of the Town of Los Gatos Joint Town Council, Parking Authority, and Successor Agency. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Stephen Leonardis.
Here.
Councilmember Diane McNutt.
Here.
Councilmember Joe Krasinski.
Here.
Vice Mayor Barbara Spector.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Steve Rice.
Here. The tradition at our council meetings is to have our Pledge of Allegiance led by a member of our youth community who's been identified as a future leader for our community. And when I tell you a little bit about Caitlin Huang, you'll understand why she's coming up here. Caitlin is a 7th grader at Fisher Middle School. Her favorite subjects are, you're okay for a second. I got to tell everybody about you first, then we'll have you come up. Her favorite school subjects are math and art. She's a member of Fisher's Builders Club, a student organization that promotes community services among students. That's with the Kiwanis, is it not, Caitlin? Yeah. She runs on the track and cross-country teams. She won the West Valley Athletic League championship this year and set a Fisher 6th grade 1,600-meter school record. She also won the West Valley Athletic League cross-country championship a couple of weeks ago. She's also a member of Los Gatos cross-country team that made it to the Junior Olympic Nationals last year, where they placed 12th in the national championship held in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. In last year's Halloween evening, instead of asking for candy, Caitlin and one of her friends decided to solicit donations on behalf of the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF. By the end of the evening, they had received more than $50 from generous Blossom Manor residents. Caitlin also actively participates in community services that clean up the public parks and trails in Los Gatos. Please welcome Caitlin Huang. Come on up, Caitlin. Would you please stand for the pledge?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, for liberty and justice for all.
Let's give her a hand. I sense a future in public speaking. Thank you very much. That's for you. One more time. Let's give her a round of applause. Next on our agenda, we have a presentation, excuse me, from El Camino Hospital. Tommy, I'm going to mispronounce it, Ryba, the CEO. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening, Mayor Rice, members of the council. Tommy Ryba, 680 Kings Mountain Road, Woodside, California, representing El Camino Hospital. Tonight is an opportunity for us to talk about some of the work that we're doing in the community and in support of the community and the health of the community in Los Gatos. And so I'd like to just give you a brief overview of some of that work. To begin with, okay. Thank you. El Camino Hospital has 50 years of experience, not only in Los Gatos, but in Mountain View. So we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the programs that we offer. And the fact that we provide acute care services as well as outpatient services, and we have about 3,000 employees. And we are a recognized leader in not only healthcare, but in IT and some of our technology and our advances in health. In Los Gatos, though, specifically, we thought we would really highlight and focus some of the work that we're doing here. We acquired Los Gatos just a couple of years ago, and we have services that really address the West Valley health and a lot of the surrounding communities. We have about 143 beds. Specifically, some of the areas of expertise are in orthopedics, men's health, and rehab. In orthopedics, we have just been named in 2011 as the best regional hospital in orthopedics, and a lot of our work is in spine and in joints replacements. In men's health, we're recognized across the country actually as a very strong program in comprehensive men's health programs. It includes not only heart health, it includes urologic health, sexual health. It really addresses the total needs of men, and it's a very strong program, and a lot of organizations around the country are actually coming to look at the model that we have here. It's personalized care, very good program. In rehab, we're actually fitting a need in the community around rehab. There's a lot of shortages of beds. There's only 3 rehab services like this in the area, so we're very pleased with the rehabilitation services we have. We're very much, since we've come into the community just a couple of years ago, getting more and more involved in the community. Our director of the hospital sits on the Los Gatos Chamber of Commerce board. We hosted the Silicon Valley Duck Race last year, a sponsor for Jazz on the Plaz, a holiday parade participant. And just a couple of weeks ago, we had Girls' Night Out, which is again focusing on women's health. We had 180 of your community members attend, and the focus there was talking about really various health issues for women, but bone screenings, high-risk breast assessment tools, since we had Breast Care Month last month in October for breast cancer. We also, as part of our Silicon Valley Duck Race, the funds that were raised there enables women to have free mammograms for those that could not. So we were able to provide free mammograms for a lot of women in the area. So what have we been doing, just very briefly? In Los Gatos, if you think of some of the community benefit, we offer about $250,000 worth in grants during this last year. Some of that is spent in the schools, appropriately so, to help with prevention, obesity, healthy eating, active living type work. We are involved with health teacher curriculum, healthy kids initiatives, and so on. And then from a broader perspective, when you think of the other services we provide, RotaCare Clinic really provides free outpatient care and screening services for the medical care and medication to the community. We served a little over close to 3,000 community members from this area in RotaCare just this last year. In Roadrunners, it's basically a program where volunteers drive cars for free and allow people to get free access to care. And so we provided 13,000 rides to seniors and frail residents so they could actually get to their health care appointments. And we immunized close to 10,000 residents. When you think of the care that we're doing in El Camino Hospital across the campuses in both Mountain View and Los Gatos, in some of the charity care that we're doing across the Silicon Valley, we wanted to give you a little bit of an understanding of some of those numbers. In charity and RotaCare, about $3 million. For Medi-Cal recipients, about $13 million. For basically behavioral health, dialysis, clinical trials, about $33 million worth of contribution. And then Medicare losses around $56 million. Is that a time? Okay. And this is my last slide. Essentially, with healthcare reform, we're really trying to best position ourselves for healthcare reform. We have a 3-year strategic plan that really focuses on making sure we provide the top decile quality for the communities we serve, top quartile in service, and making sure that we're available to you and the needs that in your community. And tonight is just a chance to give you a little bit of an overview of what we've been doing, but also I'd love to respond to questions that you have and advice that you have on better ways we can serve you.
Thank you, Ms. Ryback. Does anybody have any questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for being in our community.
Pleasure.
Now that you've been here 2 years, is there anything that you see we as town government can do to support your program?
I think it goes both ways. So maybe I would look forward to some active dialogue, listening to you and what you hear when you're talking to your constituents about gaps in care. When you think of the aging of the population and thinking of access to care with seniors, especially those that are most vulnerable in the community. I guess if I were to think about the most important thing is for us to start having a more common dialogue back and forth so we can actually make sure we meet your needs. So I think it's the most vulnerable.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you, Ms. Ryback.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Closed session report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. There was no closed session held this evening, nor any report from this evening or prior closed sessions.
Thank you. This is a time if anybody wishes to fill out or wishes to speak on an item on tonight's agenda or not on tonight's agenda. There are these kind of cream-colored cards in the back of the bench in front of you. If you would fill one of those out, you can turn those into the clerk, as Mr. Ag is doing right now. The clerk on my left, your right, and then we'll get to you when your agenda item is called. Next is council and manager reports. Any reports from council? I actually have 2 this evening. First, earlier today, the town manager, police chief Scott Seaman, and I met with, and I have to read this, the print is very small, a delegation from Hitoyoshi City, Japan, which is in the Kumamoto Prefecture. Mayor Nobutaka Tanaka and his delegation met with us earlier today, and they are very interested in the potential of a sister city relationship going back to the 1880s, right around the time Los Gatos was incorporated as a town. A gentleman from their city was here studying, eventually studying dentistry, and went back to Japan, and to this day is the most famous dentist in Japanese history. He was ultimately the dentist to the emperor for several decades. They brought with them a gift for our town. This is, I guess you'd call it, Mr. Manager, a symbol or of their town. Mayor
town
Tanaka.
in the world.
What's that?
I think they described it as the world and their town.
The world in their town. Every color, every marking means something, and I'm not going to try and pretend I remember what it all was, but it was very interesting when they explained it to us. And Mayor Tanaka was wearing a lapel pin, which he gave to me, that duplicates this, and it's in all of their literature and that type of thing. So it was a very interesting conversation translated by a member from their community who actually runs a university here in the South Bay. So that happened this afternoon. Second item I'd like to bring up is that as mayor and pursuant to the council's adopted rules of conduct, I'm going to request the scheduling of a full town council consideration of the Los Gatos Theater's conditional use permit application along with the architecture and site application if need be for the regularly scheduled town council meeting on Monday, December the 3rd. Mr. Manager, can we make that happen?
The matters are scheduled for the Planning Commission on the 14th of November, so it is our hope and anticipation to roll it to the council on December 3rd.
Great. Thank you very much. And manager matters.
Only two tonight, Mayor and Council. First, I wanted to acknowledge and thank the Council for their strong support and direction regarding the opening of the Los Gatos Creekside Sports Park just a week ago last weekend. And it was a tremendous event with youth sports and adult sports from throughout the community involved. We're already getting requests to schedule the sports park, which was clearly the council's intent. And anybody who does want to schedule the sports park, the appropriate number to call is the Town Parks and Public Works Department at 408-399-5770. We are scheduling the sports park most often for the soccer, lacrosse, and other youth sports leagues, with the Los Gatos Saratoga Recreation and Education Department scheduling programming and classes in the idle times. But just this week already, we've gotten a request for a potential tournament of sorts on Thanksgiving Day. So we are inviting Los Gatos community to look at making use of the park, the sports park, during the years ahead, since it's been such a long-awaited resource for this community. Second, I wanted to acknowledge many people for the town's participation in last week's Great Shakeout, which was a Bay Area-wide effort to mobilize in response to anticipated volunteer care and human service demands in the event of a major disaster. And here in Los Gatos, with the support of the Red Cross and the Jewish Community Center, our police department coordinated CERT, our community emergency response team, town staff, and volunteers in a simulated response to a care and service center that would be established at the JCC in the event of a disaster. I'm now going to turn to the council's tradition of the last year.
Before you do that, one more second. Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. Manager, I had a question regarding the sports park, just a clarification. I know we don't have a written policy yet on use, but my presumption would be at this point, any request for use would be for public community events and not for private activities. Is that correct?
It is for groups and organizations that are open to the public, such as youth soccer. It's not for pickup
Birthday
games,
parties.
not for birthday parties, things like that. Yeah, correct.
Thank you.
Tonight's Did You Know is very timely. It's regarding the election, and it'll be presented by Clerk Administrator Mazarin Vicaria.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Did you know that 19,097 Los Gatos residents are registered to vote for tomorrow's election, and 872 of them registered to vote online? The Santa Clara County Registrar of Voters issued 14,812 vote-by-mail ballots to Los Gatos residents, and over 5,500 have been returned so far. So, please vote. If you have a mail-in ballot, please return it to any polling place or the Registrar of Voters by 8 p.m. on November 6th. Polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. Voters can also return their ballots to Town Hall between 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. tomorrow. The Santa Clara County Registrar of Voters website is a great resource. It even has a downloadable mobile app which allows you to find your polling place, see a sample ballot, and track your vote-by-mail ballot, among other things. So for further information, please visit www.sccvote.org or call 408-299-VOTE with any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is the consent items. Are there any members of the council that wish to pull a consent item? Seeing none, do any members of the public wish to pull a consent item? I see none. I'll look to the council for a motion. Councilmember Brzezinski.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next on our agenda is verbal communications. This is an opportunity for anybody who wishes to speak on any item that is not on tonight's agenda may do so for a period of up to 3 minutes. I have one card, so if other people wish to speak, you can do so. You can fill out a card and get it to the clerk while Mr. Carl Gardino speaks for up to 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor Rice and members of the council. My name is Carl Guardino with the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, and I reside on Rose Avenue in Monte Sereno. It's a pleasure to be here tonight and to invite each of you to join us again this year for our 8th annual Applied Materials Silicon Valley Turkey Trot on Thanksgiving morning. And want to encourage you because we have an opportunity this year to raise and donate more than $750,000 to 3 great local charities helping needy families: the Second Harvest Food Bank, the Housing Trust of Santa Clara County, and the Children's Health Initiative. But we can't do it without you and people in this room, because we achieve that goal if we hit our stretch goal of 25,000 paid participants in our 5K run or walk, or our 10K run, and 1,500 children ages 2 through 9 in our Lucille Packard Kids Fun Run. And Scott Seaman, this is for you, Chief, because our Fry's Electronics Quickest Cop Fastest Firefighter competition already has 600 peace officers registered, but I haven't seen your name yet. Ooh. Yeah, and that's why I came tonight, to make sure you knew that it was. Good. Then his comments can come out of my time. I would also mention, of course, one of the highlights of the day is our Brocade Communications Mayor's Cup Community Challenge. Last year, Saratoga won for your size jurisdiction. They're gloating just 4.5 miles down the road. I was there the other night, and it's not pretty. So I want to encourage each of you to register. If you can't join us in person, you can virtually run around your couch or in your neighborhood that day, but you can still sign up and participate and support the cause. That's what they did last year, by the way. So I'm letting you in on their secret, and it does include the same amount of points for the town manager also signing up. With that, I want to just thank you again for all that you do for our community and your service, and encourage you, if you can, join us and participate or support us virtually, to do so on Thanksgiving morning.
Thank you, Mr. Gardino. Anybody have any questions other than how Saratoga cheated? Okay. Thank you very much.
And Mr. Mayor, I neglected to introduce the visiting talent for tonight's meeting, which is Corporal Mike Melton from the Police Department, who is one of the staff joining the executive team for this month in our meetings and gets to come to a council meeting as part of the opportunity. Corporal Melton.
Corporal Melton, welcome. Thank you.
If I may, I'll pass these out here.
Or you can put them on the table on the out in the lobby. That would be great. Thank you. I have no other cards for verbal communications. Going once, going twice. Okay. Next, we'll move on to public hearings. The first one is agenda item 6, adopting a resolution authorizing the continued use, easy for me to say, supplemental local law enforcement services funds to provide funding for 2 full-time police officers assigned as motorcycle traffic officers. Chief Seaman, welcome to the dais.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'll keep my comments short. This is actually, I believe, the 14th year that this item has been brought before you. 15 years ago, the state of California established a fund to help law enforcement meet its critical needs, and each city is given a minimum of $100,000. Larger cities do get a increase above that, but our amount for the last 15 years has been $100,000. We actually especially benefit from our relationship with the city of Montecito, and that they receive $100,000 as well, and by agreement they bring their money to our city and we use the money together to help fund motorcycle services. So this fund, this amount, if approved, will help partially fund the services of both of our motorcycle officers throughout our community in Montecito.
Any questions for the chief? Councilmember Leonardis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, last year when we voted on this, I remember there being some concerns about this money not being available in the future. Are there those concerns at this time?
The funds are part of a legislative decision each year. It is something that our State Police Chiefs Association seeks to ensure is included in the budget each year. However, it's always in jeopardy. Tomorrow, though, there's a potential for a change to that. Proposition 30, the governor's tax initiative, is actually a public safety and education initiative, and if the measure is approved, it will memorialize these funds as a constitutional amendment and will secure them from here on forward.
Thank you.
Okay, further questions? Seeing none, this is a public hearing. I have no cards for this agenda item. Does anybody wish to speak to agenda item 6? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and look to council for further discussion or a motion. Councilmember Brzezinski.
I will move to adopt the authorizing resolution as contained in our staff report.
Second.
So motion a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Sorry that was so hard, Chief. Next, we'll move on to agenda item 7. However, Vice Mayor Spector?
I will be recusing myself because of the proximity of my home to this property.
Great. Thank you. We'll call you back in when we move on. So this is zoning code amendment application A-12-002, 114 Royce Street, property owner Hallway Partners LLC. Consider a request to amend Town Code Section 29.60.320 regarding permitted uses in the C2. Staff report by Marnie Mosley.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, council members. As the Mayor already mentioned, the amendment tonight is to amend Section 29.60.320 of the Town Code regarding permitted uses in the C2 zone. The property owner is the applicant and is interested in including his property in a list of locations that are exempt from the restrictions against office and personal service uses on the ground floor within the C2 zone. The amendment was considered by both the CDAC and the GPC, and both committees were unanimous in supporting the exception for the rear suites based on the lack of visibility, which affects the usability of the space for retail purposes. Staff recommends that the council introduce the attached ordinance and make the required findings provided within the staff report. We are here if you have any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Mosley. Any questions of staff? Seeing none. I do have a card on this item, so we're going to open the public hearing and hear from Marvin Bamberg.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, I'm Marvin Bamberg of MBA Architects, here speaking on behalf of the owner of the property. The staff report is quite thorough. This is a matter of a building located within the C2 zone that has very poor exposure and is very unappealing to retail businesses. We'd like permission to lease it to service uses or office uses. At least that will put somebody in this space who might add to the downtown commerce. I find that the Planning Commission and the staff both unanimously recommend approval. We hope that you will too, and I'll be happy to try to answer your questions.
Great. Anybody have any questions for Mr. Bamberg?
Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other cards on this item. Does anybody wish to speak to agenda item 7? Seeing nobody, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and look to council for any other discussion. Seeing none, I think I'll have the clerk read the title of the ordinance.
Ordinance of the Town of Los Gatos amending Section 29.60.320 of the Town Code regarding permitted uses in the C2 zone.
Any council members wish to make a motion? Councilmember Leonardis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we have 4 bullet points here, and I will move to accept the Planning Commission's recommendations and findings in the form of the meeting minutes, which includes attachment 4. Follow the recommendation of the Planning Commission and adopt the Zoning Code Amendment A-12-002. Make the finding that the proposed zoning code amendments are consistent with the general plan and its elements, attachment 1, and then introduce the ordinance which was just read, which is attachment 2.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries 4-0. You read our minds. Next is agenda item 8. This is a plan development application PD-12-002, 626 West Parr Avenue. Property owner Villa Vasona, applicant Highland Property Development. Also an ordinance, and staff report by Joel Paulson. Mr. Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor Rice, council members, ladies and gentlemen. In June, the council adopted a resolution authorizing the town manager to rescind existing agreements and negotiate and execute new agreements. We are getting close to having those new agreements in place. The current plan development ordinance has a lot of terms from the previous agreement, and therefore it needs to be modified so they can reflect the new agreements. Based on the consistency of the existing development with the general plan, the staff recommends that the council make the finding that it is consistent with the general plan and introduce the draft plan development ordinance. That concludes staff's report, and if there's any questions, we are here as well as a representative from Highland Property Development.
Okay. Any questions of staff? Seeing none, I have no cards on this item, but I will open the public hearing. Does anybody wish to speak to agenda item number 8? There's a lot of you here. You're here for something. All right, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing and look, I guess, Ms. Boy, I am having trouble signing. Ms. Vaccaria, would you read the ordinance title, please?
Sure. Ordinance of the Town of Los Gatos modifying Ordinance 1698 and amending the Town Code affecting a zone change from R-18 PD to R-18 PD for property at 626 West Parr Avenue, also known as 612 West Parr Avenue, APN 406-28034.
Great, thank you. I'll look to council for further questions or a motion. Councilmember Brzezinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will move to waive the reading of the proposed ordinance and make the required findings that the zone change is consistent with the general plan and its elements as contained in Attachment 1 in our document, and introduce the ordinance of the Town of Los Gatos to effectuate the zone change modification that's in Attachment 3 in tonight's report.
So motion, is there a second? Second by the Vice Mayor. Any discussion? Those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. On to other business, agenda item 9. This is the Veterans Memorial and Support Foundation of Los Gatos with a request. While they're setting up, I'm going to look to the town manager for the staff report.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, before you is the staff report that was distributed with the agenda for tonight's meeting, as well as a desk item that includes an... I'll pause.
Okay? All right.
That includes an email from the chair of the Arts and Culture Commission. About 6 or 8 months ago, the mayor and my office received requests from multiple service clubs to establish a veterans memorial in the town of Los Gatos. The mayor and I had the good fortune of meeting with an ad hoc committee that has progressed in establishing themselves as a formal organization and mission, and I would like to return following their presentation with staff considerations and recommendations for you tonight. In speaking on behalf of the foundation and presenting their request is Ms. Ellen Monzo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Ms. Monzo, welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, Town Council members, it gives me great pleasure to tell you about a very exciting foundation in the town of Los Gatos. Lights, please. I understand, Mayor Rice, that you approached Mike Frantodakis, our president, about the possibility of creating a tribute to veterans in the town. And we're excited to share and present to you this evening information about our progress to date and where we stand. We have limited time on the agenda, so in consideration of that fact, I kindly request that you listen to our commentary, hold questions, and my colleagues and I will be glad to comment on those following. The primary objectives and purpose of this foundation are as follows. First, to raise funds and erect and support the ongoing maintenance of a veterans memorial located in the town of Los Gatos that promotes a better understanding of the contribution, sacrifices of our military men and women who protect our freedom daily for those of us in America. Second, we intend to ensure that the Veterans Memorial of this in Los Gatos is a resource for the historical understanding and recognition of all veterans, past, present, future, all arms of the military, all conflicts, that have served or are serving or will serve our nation in the United States and the specialized services, their sacrifices, and the sacrifices of their families. And to that end, the Foundation chooses to maintain the Veterans Memorial to be built in Los Gatos, to maintain and be under the authority of the Foundation in perpetuity. Through this endeavor, we plan to educate our community and neighboring communities relative to the history of our military, our veterans, and their contributions to the American people. And finally, and of primary importance, the Foundation has been developed to provide additional humanitarian support to our veterans and our military men and women. This is a photo of our inaugural signing of our Articles of Incorporation, which were filed with the State of California on October 4th, 2012. We are now in the process of filing our nonprofit 501c application, which is complete and is ready to go. And we've created a board that has approved its bylaws. Bylaws are ready to go as part of that. As you may know, the nonprofit status takes about 6 months or so for the IRS to approve that. However, any contributions that we receive in the interim can be considered and will be considered donations upon approval of the 501c, retroactive to the start date of our incorporation date of October 4th. The foundation structure will include 3 important teams of contributors in addition to our donors. 1, Board of Directors. Our inaugural Board of Directors is already in place. It might be no surprise to you that many members of the board are veterans themselves. 90% of the board are veterans. Second, an advisory board, which is underway. And in addition to making financial contributions to our cause, they will offer their advice and their valued expertise and experience. And volunteers who are yet to be recruited. We've been careful to recruit individuals from various organizations throughout the town of Los Gatos, the Lions Club, the Rotary Clubs, the Kiwanis, Seroptas Club, the Elks, and more. And one of our notable advisory members, who's I'm pleased to say is with us tonight, brings a great deal of experience here, and that is Dr. Francis J. Harvey, who is sitting to my left, who is a Los Gatos resident, as well as the former 19th Secretary of the United States Army. In addition, we're very delighted to have on our Board of Directors another notable Los Gatos resident, Major General Retired Kent Hillhouse, who is behind me, who, as a young first lieutenant, was a 2-time Silver Star recipient for his valor and extraordinary heroic acts in the course of duty while he was in Vietnam. We've identified 8 subcommittees, each of which will be managed by one of the members of the board, and those subcommittees will obviously require volunteers as we get going. So what's our goal tonight? Our goal tonight is to inform you relative to the foundation, the mission, goals, and objectives, and current status. Hopefully we've covered a little bit of that. But to more importantly, seek the Council's commitment of our preferred location for our tribute to our veterans, and to hold the space for that purpose. And in 120 days, we intend to return with an actual design for the memorial that we will establish itself. Second, we seek Council's commitment for an ARC grant for $20,000 that we understand might be or will be available to Council, and we hope that we will be able to demonstrate our rationale for that consideration. Earlier, we presented the foundation goal of establishing a memorial to our veterans. Here's how we see that memorial being used. As you heard, it's our intention to honor all veterans, past, present, future, from all branches of the military. And we anticipate that that memorial will be used for events and celebrations that recognize days such as Memorial Day, Veterans Day, 4th of July, and more. As a result, it's only appropriate that we have the tribute have the memorial in a very prominent place in town. And we anticipated that location needs to be frequented and will be frequented by individuals of all ages and of all physical abilities. And of course, as we entertain design ideas, we want to make sure that we're looking for a design that offers low maintenance. So, as we take a look at how we're going to go about this, we have execution plans that call for approaching the creation of an artist's conceptual design with a phased approach. Our preferred location is the town civic center, right where we are, which consists of obviously the lawn as well as the plaza. And why have we chosen this space? Well, first of all, it addresses the prominence, the visibility that we would like this memorial to have. Secondly, this space offers security with police dispatch right nearby. Third, we understand that the existing fountain that's currently in the plaza can no longer be used because of its pooling, and therefore we see this as an opportunity to improve the aesthetic appeal of that space while at the same time resolving an issue. In addition, the plaza holds special significance in the fact that this area was once upon a time a bomb shelter. That structure, therefore, should be able to handle the weight of any memorial. We'd like to create an approach that appeals to individuals of all ages, and most importantly, that celebrates freedom. We plan on choosing a design for this plaza area that softens the space and also offers shade, for it's quite hot in the summer. And in light of the shared space with other tenants right nearby, we plan to engage others from the Los Gatos community in looking at and advising and considering our design perspective. Given the prominence of the plaza, we envision an art structure in our design, and for that we request the consideration for the $20,000 art grant that I mentioned earlier. The lawn where the flagpoles are already in place and the combination of the lawn and the plaza provide a very, very nice aesthetic tiered effect. So one looks up to the memorial, which would be very nice. And we're aware of the town's plan to construct a bridge. And that bridge is going to, this is a picture of the landing in the back of the plaza. That bridge, as we understand it, will go from the landing over to Pageant Park. As a result, it's our desire to create some consistency with what we do on the plaza, of course, with also the bridge. And also that of Pageant Park. Now, we understand that this committee has already, this council has already made decisions relative to a plan for Pageant Park. What we're simply asking for in Pageant Park is the consideration of downstream having the same kind of look and feel as that which we offer through in the memorial through the placement of a single flag in the hillside at about 2 o'clock that allows us to raise and hoist a flag and lower a flag with a podium or platform at its base so that we can have a place for perhaps a bagpiper or a French horn musician to stand and perform during certain celebrations. The existing flags on the lawn, which honor America, California, and the town of Los Gatos, will serve as a great focal point, and that, along with dedicated bricks out on the lawn, will provide a great entrance for people to recognize that they're approaching the memorial. Implementation for our plan, in working with our artists, calls for a 3-phased artist conceptual design. First, we're going to ask our artists to focus on the plaza and the lawn, which is our greatest emphasis. And then second, we'll ask them to take a look at driving consistency with the bridge, and then finally, taking a look at a flagpole with a platform for the hillside. Our goal is to be back in front of this council within 120 days with a design, our design of choice, and at that time, ask for your approval on the project. So, where are we? Timeline? Obviously, tonight's a very important meeting. With your approval tonight, we plan to, by the 12th of this month, issue a call to interested artists and architects. We're going to do that through a Los Gatos Weekly and through the Los Gatos Patch. Then host an artist and architect meeting in the town chambers, during which we will articulate our plans, articulate our requirements, and request any interested artists to come back to us no later than on or about January 7th with the design and their proposal. And then no later than March 4th, which is the meeting that you have approximately 120 days downstream, we plan to return to this council with our idea and our plan and ask for your approval on our project. Well, earlier we indicated that we were requesting commitments on behalf of town council. Now you've heard our story. In this Jubilee year, we see a great opportunity for adding to Los Gatos' history by expressing our thanks to our military men and women who've put their lives on the line to support the freedom of those back at home. We indicated that we were here tonight, in addition to sharing the status of our foundation with you, to seek commitment in 2 areas. Commitment 1, to ask that council reserve the plaza and the lawn for us to return to you by March 4th with a plan and a design of our choice. And commitment 2, to earmark the $20,000 art grant for the purposes of the Veterans Memorial and Support Foundation of Los Gatos. Well, you've been a great audience. We think we can add to the history of Los Gatos for the next 125 years with the celebration of our veterans and the wonderful things that they've done for our freedom. And I, at this point in time, would ask that if there are any questions, I'd love to host them with my colleagues, but more importantly, ask you whether we have a commitment from the town council.
Thank you. I'm going to look to council for questions. Councilmember McNutt. Please stay up. We've got.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for your presentation. And this is an idea that's been talked about for the 10 years I've been on council, and so I'm glad to see it finally coming forward in a very real way. Plus, I cannot help myself. I have to give a little commercial. As part of my day job, I coordinate Silicon Valley Reads, and our theme next year is Invisible Wounds of War. So starting on January 1st until April, we'll be having activities throughout the county. So this is like perfect timing for me personally. So that's really nice. But I do have some questions. When you say reserve the lawn at the Civic Center, what does that mean?
Correct. Very simply, we're asking you not to make any other plans with that space for anyone else, but to, in essence, know that it is this foundation's first and foremost desired location and space for erecting a veterans memorial. And
Okay, well, let me stop you there, because the way I understood it, the memorial would actually be on the plaza,
yes,
in the area where the the dry fountain is now.
correct. The majority of the memorial would be on the plaza. Our desire, however, would be, since we already have 3 great flags on the lawn, to incorporate them into the memorial so that people recognize that they were entering or approaching the memorial. Currently, for instance, there's a pathway that goes from one corner of that lawn to this entrance and the other corner of that lawn. That would be a great place, for instance, to have dedicated bricks to a guy like Ted Simonson, who was so well known in this town and fought in World War II, and others. And we expect to look for contributions from residents and others, and we are going to have a brick sales campaign. And so one concept that we have that we're thinking about, but obviously we need to listen to our artists, is to potentially create a brick walkway leading up to the memorial, which will largely be on the plaza. Will be on the plaza.
Okay, I'll have some comments on that later when we get to the comment part.
Okay, sure.
And then may I just ask a couple of technical
Please, go
things?
ahead.
On the call to artists, you mentioned using the weekly and patch.
Right.
Were you limiting the call to artists to just those communication channels? Because that does not seem enough to me.
Okay. Appreciate that.
And I also think it might be interesting to connect your group with the artists that had proposals for the library art, because we interviewed several, and some that had some outdoor installations that they might be interested. But I think you're going to have to step it up and be a little bit more proactive in finding the right type of landscape, sculpture, artists. I mean, there's a whole variety of types under that artist's umbrella that might be interested in this kind of thing.
We would be interested in hearing any suggestions you have along those lines. Our goal, very simply, is to make sure that we're getting to all the artists that might have an interest, especially from this community, in putting together a design for this. And so, very simply, that's why we were looking at the Los Gatos Patch and the Los Gatos Weekly.
Sure.
But, and mind you, we will entertain other artists beyond the realm of Los Gatos. So to that end, if you have suggestions of artists that worked on the library, we're very interested in finding out about those.
Yes, staff will have all that
Wonderful.
information.
Thank you.
And then my final kind of question/comment right now, and again, I will have other comments later in the discussion, but as much as I appreciate your 120 campaign, march, and we'll make it do it, kind of can do, that's very aggressive in terms of finding an artist, developing a concept, just working it out before you bring it back to the town. So if that slips, I don't think you should be discouraged, and I don't think that we as a council should get totally locked into that date, because you may need some additional flexibility to make it happen in the best way possible.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks for now.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. What interface, if any, have you had to date with the Los Gatos Arts Commission?
We have actually spoken to several artists, and most of those artists are involved with that commission. In fact, the gentleman who's involved in moving the Arts and Cultural Center to this facility was one of the individuals we spoke with. And it was through our discussion, individual discussions, that I learned, or that I was advised that probably the best thing to do would be to issue a call to artists, much as the Arts Commission has done with a few of the projects that they have run. And so we're following suit, in essence.
And what, if any, interface with the museums, the Museums Association?
Candidly, I have to say we have not interfaced with the museum associations, and we have not to date.
And the last thing, sort of along the lines of what Ms. McNutt was saying, in looking at your calendar that you were projecting up on the screen there, I noted that one time frame started in November and ended in, I think maybe November 20. Anyway, started in November and ended on January 7th, which, as I'm sure you might imagine, is going to be a period of time when people are doing a lot of things and pulled a lot of different directions. Mm-hmm. So maybe that would be a time frame that needs to be adjusted a little out. Just a thought.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Manager, you had a couple of comments you wanted to...
Excuse me. Staff has been working with the Veterans Memorial and Support Foundation before it was established. Community Outreach Coordinator Jackie Rose serves as our liaison. In answer to Vice Mayor Spector's question, I believe the foundation has met with Mr. Ag, and we have staff has informed the Arts and Culture Commission of the efforts of the Veterans Foundation, which led to the chair of that commission sending a desk item to the council today. Staff has reviewed the requests from the foundation and has made 2 recommendations to the council. One, as we previously recommended to the foundation, that they should submit multiple proposals for council consideration for the design or location of a memorial. In particular, they have responded to and recognized concerns staff has raised regarding anything that hardens the deck space. In addition, we now have other changes underway on the deck, such as the museums moving in there and the Friends of the Library bookstore, pursuant to council prior direction, as well as the continued operation of the police headquarters and the town offices. So there's going to be a lot of users of the deck space, and we recommend multiple proposals for council consideration at that time. Regarding pageant grounds, the landscape and hardscape is indeed underway to both the Arts Commission and the Veterans Foundation. We've indicated that there might be as much as $20,000 to $25,000 surplus available in that project budget for subsequent council allocation for public art originally intended for the pageant grounds. Based on a prior discussion with the Arts and Culture Commission, they have interest in any funding that might be available for public art and pageant grounds being redirected to a public art project in front of the library. We now have the Veterans Memorial Foundation asking for any of those funds that might be available to be redirected to them for this memorial project. The bridge is still a concept. It's an unfunded item, and both the public art at pageant grounds and/or library and/or Veterans Memorial, as well as the prospect of a bridge to pageant grounds, will be brought to the council at your capital projects, priorities, and funding session now scheduled for January. That concludes staff report at this time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. This is a public hearing, so I'm going to...
Mr. Mayor?
Oh, sorry. Councilmember Brzezinski.
This is for clarification. When you said reserve the front lawn of the Civic Center for purposes of the memorial, would you clarify exactly the restrictions that you're envisioning for that?
Very simply, if any other organization or community group has a desire to erect something on the lawn, we would ask that you not entertain that until you've had an opportunity to see what we put before you relative to a veterans memorial.
All right. I wasn't assuming anyone was going to propose some new structure on the front lawn, but just to remind us all how significant our front lawn is to the community for Music in the Park and 4th of July, and whatever you're going to propose for that lawn somehow has to be integrated within the context of that type of event and leaving the lawn available for the community. But as far as the other goes, I think we could probably sign off on no other memorials out there on the lawn until you get back to us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Manager.
And one additional clarification, the only project we've heard discussion of to date, but we're waiting for submittal of it for review and council action if need be, is Los Gatos Music and Arts, which is the nonprofit that runs the Music in the Park series in co-sponsorship with the town, has tentative plans for taking the temporary stage that's erected every summer adjacent to the building and making that a permanent stage at some point in the next year or two. That's the only additional project we've heard that might be coming before you for the Civic Center lawn area.
Great. Thank you. And thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Opening up the public hearing, I have a card from John Agg. And if anybody else wishes to speak to this item after Mr. Agg, please fill out a card and hand it in to the clerk on my left, your right.
I will make this very, very brief. Good evening, Mayor Rice and Vice Mayor Spector, council members. I'd like to add the museums of Los Gatos support to the concept that has just been described. The proposal by the Veterans Foundation for a Veterans Memorial within the Civic Center complex. We're looking forward to working with the town and the Veterans Foundation to make sure the memorial and the entire Civic Center are balanced, work well together, and engage public in civic spaces and public art. I would add, because listening to the presentation this evening, the museum has already offered to help with the research in terms of veterans and local residents that have been involved in the wars in the past. And also, I would add that we have some great contacts, world-renowned sculptors who I'm sure would love to contribute to the design concept. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Agg? Thank you. Next card, John Shepherdson.
Good evening. I didn't plan on speaking on this topic. I came here for another topic. But I thought I would add a few things. The city of Santa Clara has a Veterans Memorial, and it's very nice, and I've been out there for events. And it's a quiet place. It's in a park. I've purchased a brick, and so in concept, I think it's a great idea. My concern is about the location, and I would just not want a lot of public events to end up sort of defaming a memorial. I think it would. I would think the memorial is sort of hallowed ground, and if we have people walking on it and dropping ice cream and those kinds of things that you have happen in public events, I think it would take away from the nature of what we're trying to do. So my thought is that to do something like this, but maybe in another location where there is the proper respect. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Brzezinski.
If I could say to your point, Mr. Shepherdson, I think your point's well made. That's why I was concerned about the front lawn, because a pathway of bricks memorializing our veterans that also serves as the platform for our music in the summer and the games of the kids at 4th of July and all of those kinds of things that definitely benefit our community and will definitely be part of the fabric of the future of our community, might be counterintuitive when you're talking about how you're organizing the component of the memorial that's on the front lawn. So I would ask that as the artists consider the proposal, that be one of the considerations, that how do we duly secure and respect the memorial in such a way that it's open to our public, but also gives a sense of honor and regard for the individuals it represents. So just one more point to consider as you look at your proposal going forward.
And if I may briefly just follow up on that, in Santa Clara, they've got these large trees, and the roadway is fairly close, but it's a park that's sort of set off, and they have a number of Memorial Day, Veterans Day events, and so you've got a lot of family and servicemen that did serve veterans, and so I just think that you wouldn't want to have a loved one's name on a brick and just not be maintained well and defamed, and so I think we're on the same point. Thank you.
Thanks. I have no other cards. Yeah, you're done. Thank you, Mr. Shepherdson. Seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing. Mr. Larson?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, in response to Councilman Brzezinski's comment, staff could certainly provide to the foundation for their call for artists just a listing of all the annually recurring events that occur on the deck and on the front lawn, from Music in the Park to July 4th to Fiesta de Arts. We have multiple library reading programs that still occur on the front lawn and the deck. The Kids Fair that's done in conjunction with the Children's Center, and then the museum, as part of their taking over the old library space, has proposed exhibitions and possible performances up on the deck on a periodic basis as well. So we have a variety of things. So all of those events could be kept in mind by the artists as they're designing what may be appropriate in which location.
Okay. Further questions or discussion? Councilmember McNutt?
Thank you, Mayor. So several points to kind of give, or suggestions to give to the foundation. Again, I very much support the idea. I think the foundation is very new, although it's been talked about for so long. As an organization, you're still very new. You have some new people involved in your advisory council and so on. And I think it would be good to take a breath and be thoughtful about this for a little bit and say, how much do we value having that quiet place of reflection, as Mr. Shepherdson described, versus having a location that's highly visible and educational. So you have things to weigh, and just kind of think about that. No right or wrong answer, but it's something for you to ponder. If you go ahead and decide that the fountain area upstairs is your number one choice, I actually can visualize that really well. The front lawn, I am not too sure about, and the bricks I'm not too sure about. I certainly wouldn't want to see you launch a brick sale without having a design and having complete approval from the town and how that would happen. There are other ways to raise funds and to honor individuals other than bricks. That's always the thing that pops into everyone's mind. And again, the library is a great example. All the new leaves, donor leaves, have just been put up on the wall out on the patio there. So there's lots of ways, and again, an artist can really help you figure all that out. I'm not sure about the flag and pageant grounds. I can't quite see how all of that works together. I understand better the flags on the front and the deck upstairs. Not sure. I'm not getting the connection of yet another flag out in pageant. And as the manager mentioned, the bridge, as much as I love the idea of the bridge, is unfunded, and who knows when and if that'll ever happen or what it's going to look like. So I hate to see you get too tied up in that, because that might not happen for a few years. And then in terms of the funding, I would not be prepared right now to guarantee that one specific line item, and I don't think that's actually how you should approach it, because again, as the manager's already pointed out, Arts Commission has already expressed some interest in that one pot of money. I think when you have your proposal more defined, what you want to do is to ask us to consider if there is funding available from the town to support that, and then let the town decide if we have a pot of money somewhere that we can contribute to that, rather than just zoning in on something and creating potential controversy or competition with other groups before you even get started. So I think you need to move slowly and carefully, but enthusiastically. And I think what you'll hear from the council is, well, I shouldn't say what I think. What you'll hear from me is to be as supportive as possible, but understand, as you've already heard tonight, we have a lot of interests to juggle, a lot of competing values to weigh as we make any decisions.
Other questions, comments? Councilmember Brzezinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to also commend you for the progress made to date. It's exciting. I think that there's going to be a great interest in our community for your completion in this very extraordinary attempt to honor our veterans, and I look forward to it being completed as quickly as is reasonable. And I think that I agree with Councilwoman McNutt that we don't want to, we want to fast track this in a very rational way and not hold ourselves to timeframes that might be unrealistic as we start moving through the process. But I would certainly love to see this completed in the very near future, and I know that there's probably a date and time somewhere out there in the future that we could see at least the first phase of this completed, maybe July 4th, I don't know, but some intention to have progress made, but keep open the possibility of moving the deadline date to a point where we'll be very patient, because we know that something great is going to occur at the very end. As I look at this, I'm thinking probably the focus for me would be the deck up above us. And that to me is the most, it's a classic opportunity for you to create an educational as well as a very meditative kind of environment. And I think it's that combination that will work very nicely in order for us to make sure it's secured in a way that gives due respect. I think that would be important for us to keep in mind as we move forward. All of the events that the manager mentioned are classic and longstanding traditions with us now, or are going to be traditions as they come into play. And that is how this Civic Center is enlivened, by having our people here. And if you can consider the fact that you have a natural draw, there will be a population. This will not be isolated. So the concept, I guess, I would be looking for is how do you position the memorial so that people who are in our community can, because they're here for other things, be drawn to and experience what you're going to eventually achieve. So that would be my recommendation. Again, with a great deal of enthusiasm for what you've accomplished to date, and look forward to the next phases of the process.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. First of all, that was a great presentation, so thank you. I kept thinking, well, she only gets 3 minutes, or is it 5, or is it 10? And then I figured, what the heck? Let's let her go. We have, from what we've been dealing with as a council in the recent past, we have an arts commission that, as the manager pointed out, has an eye toward that 20,000 and is also looking to put public art originally in the Pageant Park, and now they're looking at other places around here in the library area. That is not a defined, neither the monies nor the location or what it is defined yet. We have the Museums Association that is has mentioned the use of the what the manager calls the deck up above us. So there are other organizations looking to the areas around here or above us, looking to the monies. In my perfect world, the 3 organizations, your organization and the Arts Commission and the museums, would cooperatively come forward with something that everybody can buy in on. That would be my ideal world. I see that your memorial being a place that is comfortable, where people can contemplate, can be comfortable, can have peace, can contemplate. I know that the deck is an unused part of our Civic Center, but to me it's also a very stark, hot, uncomfortable part of our Civic Center. And in my mind, your call to artists would have a challenge, but that's what artists have to do when they're called to art. They have to deal with the challenge. And if that's where you decide to go, it could be a great use of it, but it could also be a challenging use. So I wish you luck. I'm looking forward to having your ideas come back before us. And I agree with what everyone else has said in that I can appreciate a defined, aggressive time frame, but I would not let time drive the quality of your future presentation and the product that you're bringing forward.
I'm going to weigh in a little bit. You already know you have no more ardent supporter in this endeavor than I. And I'm thrilled to have you bring forward, first of all, a really excellent presentation and then the concept. I don't want to repeat what everybody else has said, but I'm going to say a couple of things that they've already said. First of all, the front lawn is going to be a challenge. The thought of having bricks out there with people dancing on them during music in the park probably is a little bit of an incongruity that we would have a tough time getting around. As much as I hate the thought of losing that wonderful dry fountain that dominates the deck, it does seem like a natural place. And while I completely agree with Mr. Shepherdson's comments about a space that's reflective and I'll use the word dignified, having been on 2 8th-grade trips to Washington, D.C. with a bunch of preteen and young teenagers running around the memorials there, that can be incorporated in a way that still preserves the dignity of what you're trying to accomplish without it being somber, overly somber and silent. And that is the challenge that whomever ultimately designs this memorial will have to overcome. It could also be viewed as an opportunity as much as a challenge, and hopefully they will. Trying to think what else I was going to add to that hasn't already been said, but I think that's enough. But I'm going to take, I know what it was. The request for the funding, I think, is a little premature. Let's see what comes forward, and then the council and the Arts Commission and the various stakeholders can all come together and hopefully figure out a funding plan that you may have enough interest in the community you won't need public funding. You can do it through donations, and that would be even more wonderful. And I don't think I've done this entire year as mayor, but I'm going to take mayoral prerogative at this point, and I'm going to move that we authorize the foundation to develop and submit for council review and approval 2 to 4 proposals for the location and design of the Veterans Memorial at the Los Gatos Civic Center, incorporating the pageant grounds, Civic Center deck, and or the front lawn and the flagpoles. I'm not going to limit it to any particular place because you don't know what you don't know. And if somebody comes forward with something that's just absolutely gangbusters that can fit in the front, I think we need to see that as well. So that is my motion, and I'll look for a second. Second by the Vice Mayor. Any discussion? Please.
May I just clarify, is that and/or between each of the sections down there, pageant grounds and/or civic center deck and/or front lawn and flagpoles?
That would be correct.
Thank you.
Any discussion, further discussion? Those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries unanimously, and we look forward to seeing what you bring back in the very near future.
Thank you. Thank you.
And normally we don't let you applaud, but I'm cool with that too. All right, we're going to move on to agenda item 10. I'll bring to council's attention, we do have a desk item on this one as well. I didn't mention it on the last one, but I think you all saw it because the manager referred to it. This is property location 90 to 160 Albright Way and 14600 Winchester Boulevard, considering a request for approval of an exception to the story pole policy to allow an alternative to standard story pole installation to illustrate and provide notice of the proposed project. And I'm not going to read the APNs. Staff report is Joel Paulson, and I got it right that time.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. As you're all well aware, you have been discussing the existing story pole policy over the last several months. The latest conversation being a study session on September 4th, where the council provided direction to staff regarding potential modifications that would come back for further consideration by the council. Staff has received a request for an exception for the story poles of the proposed Albright Office Park. The current policy doesn't require the council to make a determination. However, given the conversations that have recently occurred, staff thought it was appropriate to bring that forward for the council's consideration. The applicant has submitted a letter outlining their reasoning for why they feel the exception is justified. Generally, it boils down to 2 issues, which are public safety concerns and then the existing operations and ongoing operations of the existing tenants and or future tenants of the existing buildings out on the site. The applicant's proposing a few items to help illustrate the height of the proposed buildings. One is, as part of the environmental impact report that's currently being processed, though, photo simulations will be prepared and then peer reviewed by the town consultant's photo simulation consultant. They're also proposing to use mechanical lifts to raise up to the height in various locations of proposed buildings on the site. And then those will have a beam with some story pole netting to draw additional attention to those. They had 2 on-site signs before, one on Winchester Boulevard and one on the creek frontage. They're proposed to do that again with photo simulations and proposed site plan. And then they'll also put an ad in the local newspaper because they plan to operate the lifts not 24 hours a day, every day, but Monday through Friday from 7:30 to 10 a.m. and from 4 to 6 p.m. is what they're proposing. Staff's looked at the proposed alternative to the story poles and believes that there may be some merit to what they are proposing, given the existing buildings and public street that are on the site and the proposed location of the new buildings. It makes it challenging to install story poles as we typically would see on other smaller scale projects. So at this time, you mentioned there was a desk item. Staff requests that the council consider the applicant's proposal. They're here. They'll provide a presentation and determine whether or not they feel that it's appropriate to use their proposed alternative. We also received a question from a council member trying to get an idea of kind of where we are in the process for the existing project. So currently, staff's working with our consultants to prepare an administrative draft of an environmental impact report. We're hopeful that within the next 3 to 6 weeks, public draft will be available. Following that, completion of that, then it would go before the Planning Commission, which potentially could be in January. And then following that, depending on the Planning Commission's recommendation, it would move forward to the council for their consideration.
As soon as I said the bricks,
That concludes staff's report. At this time, the applicant also has a presentation, and they may be able to answer some questions. If you have questions of staff, we are available.
Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. This is a staff. It's a timing kind of, or scheduling kind of question. You were talking about the process that this application is going to be going through. So I understand the EIR study, and then the Planning Commission, and then the council. So when would the story poles become an issue? I.e., when would they be required to go up, and why are we doing this issue now relative to whatever your answer is going to be? It's a timing thing.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I'll address this question. The proposal by the applicant is to have these simulated story poles, the lifts, go up 2 to 3 weeks prior to the Planning Commission hearing. We do not have the Planning Commission hearing set yet. There will likely be multiple times this goes before the Planning Commission, once during the EIR review process, and then as a public hearing for the project itself. What we are bringing it forward you now is one, just to get the matter resolved, given we've had the request from the applicant. We didn't want to face a challenge of trying to bring this on a mayoral transition night, where we usually don't schedule items. We're having to call a special meeting over the holidays or in early January, when the council is typically on recess. Somebody's mic is moving, but I don't. Okay. We'll let K-Cat manage the sound.
The handheld is here and it's off.
Please turn off mics.
It's now out with you.
Okay.
So,
Moving right along.
yes. So, and we're also, I think the applicant was concerned with a policy change in the midstream of their project for story poles. The council has given some preliminary direction on story pole changes. We're hoping to bring story pole policy changes back to you in January or early 2013, as mentioned in the staff report. And I think the applicant had a concern of working down one set of rules and then having the rules changed. and thought by addressing the issue now before council, November, December timeframe would be appropriate.
Does that answer your question? Okay, other questions of staff? Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you. Just to clarify that, so if this comes to Planning Commission twice, once as part of EIR review and once as the application review, would the story pole or their
Equivalent.
be set up for the 2 weeks prior on both of those?
No, it's generally the story poles are just set up before the actual project goes before the Planning Commission.
Okay, and then one of the questions that was posed in the desk item that we received, sometimes projects change and evolve as they go through the process. If that were to happen, if we approve this, are we locking into the exact diagram that they have proposed tonight, or how would that work in terms of moving that around to be appropriate if they shift things?
I know the applicant will speak to that probably more, but the site plan that's illustrated in the applicant's letter is the fixed site plan for both the plan development and the architecture and site application. We're awaiting revised plans reflecting that, as well as some of the other items that were brought up with the additional height. Many of those flexibilities that were in the original application have been and or are going to be removed, and so those will be set. We would probably look to have some flexibility on the town manager's behalf. You know, if the crane needs to move a few feet one way or the other, but it's not going to be any wholesale change of the proposed building footprints.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other questions of staff? I see none. I'm going to go ahead and open up the public hearing. I'll go ahead and call the applicant first, John Schenk.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, members of the Town Council. John Schenk, here back to speak to you again about the wonderful Albright Way project. And as you know, or are becoming more aware, the project's evolved since what we had discussed last fall. The project is specifically now an all-office project with, as Mr. Paulson was just mentioning, an all-in maximum height of 65 feet. There are no exceptions to the 65 feet in terms of, sometimes there are exceptions for roof screens or towers or these kinds of things, maybe per code. We're suggesting that the 65 feet is an absolute cap on the building's heights, regardless of what's on the building. The issue that we're talking about tonight, though, is the policy, and how do we demonstrate the physical height of these proposed buildings on site. It's not necessarily the project, the CEQA process, or anything else, but it is that process that creates the timing. And as you heard from Mr. Paulson, we'll see how the process plays out, but to the degree we're in public hearings or in front of the Planning Commission in January, it looked like this is the right time to be proactive, to come before you with this issue, as you had, I was listening, as you had asked staff to do, or to have applicants do as we go forward under this new policy, and to come back and present this issue to you. So that's why we're here. The plan is proactive. We've tried to pick out, and I think we have all of the elements and the guidance that you've provided staff, so that we're attempting to address all the issues that may come into the new story pole policy. The process we went through was diligent. We explored with staff. We explored with the Los Gatos Monte Sereno Police Department, the Santa Clara County Fire Department, just to figure out what were the constraints, what were the issues that we had to deal with, as this is an operating office complex with public roads, and the newly proposed buildings, as you can see in one of the exhibits there, sit on top of buildings or bridge over public roads, and public safety issues did arise. I believe that what we've proposed to you is a great alternative with the mechanical lifts that will lift up a 20-foot bar. I don't know what it's made of yet. We'll figure out something. with the orange story pole netting, the traditional netting up there, along with the signage Mr. Paulson mentioned, and the photo simulations, which are prepared according to the strict guidelines of the town's consultant. Thank you, sir.
Perfect timing. So, questions of Mr. Schenk? Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Schenk, have you had a chance to see the desk item that we got this evening from Ms. Quintana?
I did.
Okay, so I had a couple of questions for you on some of the points that she raised. So the first is on the height. So you were just saying the 65 feet is an absolute cap?
Correct. I'm afraid Ms. Quintana was looking at maybe
Page
some old
2 of
information.
your, well, or page 2 of your letter, which is what I was noticing, that says 65 feet, excluding elevator and mechanical penthouses, cupolas, wireless communication.
Yeah,
antennas.
sorry. So what I was trying to say there is to the 65 feet are for the buildings, the parking structure at a maximum height of 35 feet.
Oh, so that phrase
excluding-
refers only to parking structure?
Apologize.
Okay.
Correct.
All right.
Correct.
All right. And then my follow-up on my question to Mr. Paulson, do you foresee any situation at all during the EIR process or the whole public review process where you would be shifting the location, the footprints of these buildings?
No, ma'am. Other than, the only place I'd reserve that is if they literally moved a foot or so as we got further into our design. The concept, there's been lots of engineering that's taken place. I don't see, from our perspective, changing that plan at all.
Okay. And did you have any thoughts regarding the suggestion of a video simulation?
I did not. I don't think it's, I don't think it adds to what we're trying to accomplish here. I mean, it's another way of showing height. I think the physical demonstration on height is important. I've heard that from the community loudly and clearly. And I think using the town's consultants' photo simulations as the backdrop to identify the specific locations, we were very clear on our goal, which was don't pick a place that's behind the trees. Mm-hmm. The site benefits from a lot of wonderful, tall perimeter trees, so we used those photo simulations to find locations that would allow people to see, not behind a tree, but to see the height of the buildings.
And so would that be the same answer on this? There were 3 or 4 suggested other points on different buildings. Did you have comments on any of those?
Yes, I think what we used as our basis was, again, the town's, excuse me, the town's, the locations the town and the town's consultants have identified for being the visually sensitive locations, and use those as the bases of where to locate the story poles. So these other locations, I think they would fall to a second tier. A few of them I can visualize in my head as we wouldn't see them today at all because there's a building, an existing building in front of people, specifically from the Creek Trail. But I don't think these add to any of the benefits that the 6 locations we have identified don't already cover.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Other questions? Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Schenk, I had asked staff to see a cherry picker. I mean, I know what a cherry picker looks like, but I wanted to see one that you might use. And they sent me one electronically. I don't have it here. I thought it would be helpful, excuse me, if the other council people and the audience saw your cherry picker. Do you have a photo of it here?
I do. Not of the one, but as examples.
An exemplar cherry picker.
There we go. If we can use this, we can do that. Wires on there.
Yeah. Now, with it up there, Mr. Schenk, I'll have some questions.
Yes. No, here, let's try to shoot a few others in there. It's just
For my questions, I'm going to be working on the top one.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Now, would the cherry picker, would you anticipate it, and I know this is approximate, would you see it lifting up to whatever height you would have the netting? So in other words, it would go up up to like 65 feet?
Correct. They articulate vertically this way, and then they telescope out. I don't know the angle at which it's safest at 65 feet, but compared to this one, I'm sure it would go up and then out, up to 65 feet.
And then I'll call it the bucket end of it. Is that where what kind of horizontal metal?
Sure. Think of it, whatever's going to be straight across at 20 feet with the orange netting would be on top of the bucket or attached to the bucket.
Attached to the bucket somehow, with the orange netting coming down from that
Correct.
horizontal piece. Okay.
Yes,
All right,
ma'am.
we're getting there. I think you answered a question that was very important to me, but I want to make sure, since it is so important, as a member of the General Plan Committee and the North 40 Advisory Committee, I don't know how many meetings Mr. Brzezinski and I have gone to over the past year where we have dealt with this issue of height over and over and over again. And what we learned in those meetings is when somebody said it's going to be a 30-foot home or a 40-foot office complex or whatever it is, then they add stuff on top of it. They add architectural detail, they add elevator shafts, and so all of a sudden our 35 or 40 feet becomes 50 or 55 feet. What you're talking about, though, is a height maximum, including all your functional and architectural amenities of 65 feet.
Correct.
Okay, that's a good answer. You have chosen certain hours of the weekday for your netting. You don't have weekends, and I know Ms. Quintana in her letter has challenged the scope of your hours, and maybe you would want to address that, but also you don't have weekends, and so why don't you explain to us why you have chosen the days and hours you did choose?
It was, and by the way, certainly open to any input on the adjusted hours or days. It was driven by the prospective vendors who would be operating this equipment in knowing that we needed to up and down to keep it from being an attractive nuisance. During each day that it's in operation, we stuck to the weekdays, also figuring those are the most traffic on Winchester Boulevard, et cetera. I understand the public is out and about 7 days a week, so if that's important, we can certainly incorporate that. In the hours, we're just trying to get the peak periods of when the most people would see the simulations.
Right now, those are, oh, no, there is one more question because it was just coming up. You've heard Ms. McNutt and then also Ms. Quintana's letter where the issue of when the netting would be up. And there was the issue of it being before the Planning Commission heard it as a PD. But then the issue came up of before the Planning Commission heard the environmental impact report review. At this juncture, it appears that you are not planning to put the netting up before the EIR goes before the Planning Commission. That is a question that's been raised. Why have you chosen to do it, not do the netting before the EIR?
I don't know that I made a specific decision to phrase it that way or set it up that way, but just responding to the town's policy, it seems to be addressed to, and maybe town staff can hit that one, a particular process. And so we're trying to respond to the town's policy specifically.
Thank you.
Mr. Manager?
And if I might clarify, and Mr. Paulson can add, our current policy specifies before the decision-making meeting of the Planning Commission is the actionable point for when story poles go up, not for the public comment on EIR documents. That's clearly subject to council direction and action.
Thank you. Other questions for Mr. Schenk? I see none. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have some cards on this item. First is Dale Miller.
Dale Miller, 115 Newell Court, Los Gatos. I was pleasantly surprised to see the redesign from 2 behemoth buildings that would block the views to 4 smaller buildings, but I still don't have a feel for what 65 feet is. My understanding is the top of the current Netflix building is 65 feet, but I can't envision that in this area. So to me, story poles are very important, but understanding some of the business needs of the current tenants and things, I can understand why it can't be done. But a couple suggestions. The trees that are out front, I have no idea if those are 65 feet tall or shorter. But if they are 65 feet, there's a way for us to mark what 65 feet is on those trees. And then looking at the 4 buildings, is there a way to put like 2 telephone poles at the proposed footprint of those 4 buildings that are between Winchester and the back of the building so they won't impede any of the traffic going through, and hang a net at 65 feet so people have at least a concept of what the height of these buildings are. And then the rest of the way would be to mark the plot of the other corners of the building if possible, as long as it's not in a roadway existing, so people have an idea at least of the height and the footprint of the building so that they have some understanding of what the project's going to entail. The other part is the signs that are currently out there are very, very small unless you can't get to one of the signs that's by the railroad tracks. So I would suggest that the signs be put closer to the entryway, maybe on each side, a little bit larger. And with the latest proposal, I was kind of surprised, but pleasantly surprised. I would like to see the latest drawings put out there. And then the third thing that's consistently on my mind with the North 40, with the Oka potential development, with this development, traffic is a nightmare. The new university stoplight is a disaster. If you look at busy hours in the morning and at night, it's impossible to, you have traffic backing up on Winchester trying to go left to go on to Lark. So we were told when that was going to be put in, that was going to be very smooth and things were going to work pretty well, but it has not worked that way. So I would recommend that we go back and look at that and do a real traffic study, considering what could happen with Albright Way, considering what's happened with Oka. That whole area could be gridlocked without having a really solid traffic plan when we do the final development at Albright. Thank you.
Hang on, Mr. Mr. Miller. Vice Mayor Spector has a question.
Thank you. It wasn't clear to me. You had suggestions with regard to what the applicant could do, footprint, poles, and so forth. Are you making those suggestions in addition to the cherry picker and beams, or is this in lieu of? That wasn't clear to me.
So the cherry picker and beams to me are probably not adequate for a 20-foot pole. These are large buildings. If you divide about 125,000 square foot buildings probably, so I have no idea the size of them physically. But at least you can identify one back wall with a pole from one largest length to the other largest length and put a net at 65 feet. It won't impact people that are trying to get in or work in that area. It's just on the back of the building. So for example, between Winchester and the back of the building that's there today, if you put a pole up of 65 feet, 2 poles on the 2 corners and then mark the other 2 corners, at least you have a feel for the size of the building and some height of the building and what the impact is going to be as you're coming off of 85 and driving down Winchester to see what that area looks like. My thought is, I mean, PG&E must have telephone poles 65 feet, and that would be pretty easy to do. And it would give people the visual that you need to see for the size of what these buildings are and where they're going to be located. And there's at least 2 quarters, what I could tell on the plot that I saw online, that would be away from traffic and people, so it could be done. You put 2 poles behind on the back side of these buildings, so at least people have an idea of what the footprint will look like.
And bear with me here, backside meaning toward the creek?
Well, it could be towards the creek, it could be toward Winchester, depending on how the buildings are located.
All right, that's fine. Thank you.
Ms. McNutt, did you have a question? Mr. Miller?
Thank you. Along the same line as the Vice Mayor, I wasn't clear if you were saying, if we're only talking about height, not about the total footprint of the building, can you think that you could visualize a 65-foot point in height by the use that they're proposing, the cherry pickers and the
Well,
Just the height, I'm not concerned about the size of the wall, but does that not tell you?
It gives you an idea, but not understanding what the total footprint's going to take up for how the buildings are situated.
But it would tell you the height.
It would tell you the height.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Next is Jack Van Atta.
Good evening. My name is Jack Van Natta. I'm living at 165 Euclid, speaking as a member of Los Gatos Community Alliance. As I understand it, the story pole policy is in flux, meaning that there may be changes coming soon. I agree with Janice Folk, who wrote an email asking why the necessity to develop an exception right now to the story pole policy. There seems to be plenty of time, and I don't understand to move on it so quickly. I understand the concern with building a large temporary structure made of 2x6s and 2x4 during the winter time, and that is not feasible. So I do agree with not using the wood story poles. Once a story pole policy is developed and approved, should the cherry pickers be approved, I do feel that the proposed solution of using those cherry pickers as presented will have minimal value. A 20-foot beam 65 feet in the air is like looking at a pencil about 10 feet away. You can see it, but given the surroundings, it won't show the mass of the building. Even less so looking at it from the freeway or from Winchester Avenue. Unfortunately, the orange netting at that height to the casual observer is not going to grasp the magnitude of the mass just looking at netting, which you can see through 65 feet in the air. Ideally, whatever is put up there should block the views just like a building to give a truer indicator of the mass from top down to bottom. With that said, I really don't know of any other better way than using the cherry picker concept and doing computer renderings. I do like the idea of a video with the technology that's available today. It would seem like you could create a video driving by on 85, driving by on Winchester. I think that the way the public is notified must be established. Notice cannot be put in the fine print in the back of the Los Gatos Weekly Times. I think it needs to be broadcast. 2 weeks is not enough time, especially with the limited hours and nothing on the weekend. Mr. Schenk has said that he's open to changing that. I would suggest that we start at 6:30 in the morning and go to 9:30, possibly 10, and then in the afternoon from 3 till dark. I would also suggest at least Saturdays, if not Saturday and Sunday. Excuse me. I'm not quite sure why we have to have operators there, but I could guess for the reasons for those. Whether it be unions or whether it's a safety factor, I'm not sure. And I don't know if we need operators on every one of the lifts or if we just need a couple for the total number of lifts. Lastly, the higher the structure, the more the people. The more people, the more cars. The more you allow at Albright, the higher the impact when you add in the North 40, Gateway, medical buildings at Samaritan, Swanson, Honda, et cetera, et cetera. So my concern is still with the size, and I'm pleased to see Mr. Schenk has brought the height down, but I still think it should come down further, mainly because of the people impact. As you've heard, Lark Avenue is impacted with what little changes have gone on, and we have huge changes coming with both North 40 and Albright. Thank you.
Hang on, Mr. Van Ness. Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. Both you and the prior speaker alluded to the issue of mass. And in my mind, at least, we're talking about height, but I'm not saying that one doesn't impact the other. When the town does story poles, the wooden story poles with the netting, does that somehow translate into mass for you that the cherry picker beam wouldn't accomplish?
It does, but we're talking, when I think of what was out at Swanson, as an example, I got a general feeling, even over at the Honda dealership, I got a general feeling, but we're talking 65 feet and a much larger footprint, I believe over 4 buildings. So I think it's going to be quite a big impact. And if you think about each one of those buildings being, let's say, roughly 63,000 square feet, something of that sort, and then going 65 feet up in the air, that's a lot of building. And again, when you're looking at orange netting that you can see through way up in the air, I don't think it's going to have a lot of impact on something that's 20 feet wide. The building is going to be much bigger than that.
Vice Mayor.
Assuming for the sake of argument that what you say is true, that look like an orange pencil, what suggestion, if any, do you have?
Well, I don't know what you do, because this isn't my field of expertise. Using a 20-foot beam is only a partial view of what this is actually going to be in the long run. I don't know if you can use something that is longer. You got to consider wind. You got to consider it's wintertime. We got rain coming and all that sort of thing. So I don't know what the limitations are. Maybe 20 feet is what is safe, but the beam and the netting, maybe we switch to black netting instead of orange netting, because it may stand out better. I don't even know if black netting exists, but if it did, I would probably go black instead of orange. But I say also that you need to do the computer simulations. You've got to do both, because neither one by themselves is going to give you a good view.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you, Mr. Van Nant. Janice Folk.
Thank you. Over 50 years ago, in 1961, President John F. Kennedy challenged the best and the brightest of our nation to put a man on the moon and bring him back safely before the end of the decade. In 1962, he acknowledged the difficulty of this challenge with his statement, "We choose to go to the moon and do these other things not because they are easy, but because they are hard." It's hard to put up 65-foot story poles. It's hard. And none of us here know how to do it best, but to have it only be for a few hours a day, a few days at a time, never on the weekends, and starting at 4 o'clock when it gets dark now at 5:15, I don't think is an adequate representation for the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you. Lee Quintana.
Good evening. Lee Quintana, 5 Palm Avenue. A lot of the questions and comments that I made in my letter have been addressed by questions raised by council and by Mr. Shank's presentation. However, I still am concerned about the fact that even if the cherry pickers are used and they're at 65 feet, they do not give an impression of the mass of the structure unless they could be put at all 4 corners of every building. I think some interesting suggestions were made by the first speaker, but I also think that everything that is said, to me, reinforces the need for a video that travels along the view corridors, including the trail and Los Gatos Boulevard and University and Lark, where I seriously suspect that the buildings will be visible. My other real concern is the timing of the proposed cherry pickers going up. That may be consistent with the story pole policy. However, the draft EIR is required to have an analysis of the visual effects of the project. And if those visual effects are not demonstrated on the property prior to the completion of the draft EIR, I question in my mind that the analysis could be complete. In addition, I had one other comment to make, and that is that if not for my OCD of checking the agenda for Planning Commission and Town Council meetings on the weekends prior to those meetings, I doubt that there would have been anybody here to comment or anybody would have written in anything, because I doubt that anybody would have known about it. And that concerned me, especially since when I went back and read this, the staff report, I discovered that the applicant submitted the application on October 30th. The town received it on November 1st. The staff report was written on November 1st. And here it is, November 5th, and it's already before the town council. And also, I mean, that seems like, what was the rush? Well, I think that was explained, that you want to get the EIR draft out in 3 to 6 weeks. That's a concern to me, too, because it seems like most, or very often, I won't say most, but very often, major projects seem to have EIRs or hearings during the holiday season when people have less time and are less inclined to want to spend the time to review and comment.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Quintana. Any questions? None. John Shepherdson. And this is the last card I have for this item. If anybody else wishes to speak, please fill out a card and bring it forward. Mr. Shepherdson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First point, generally, the larger the project, I think the more that the town and the people of Los Gatos have a right to know what's going up. This project, I understand it, is $250 million, $250 million. So given that it's perhaps, I guess, the largest project in the history of the town, that the notice to the community should be the greatest. So from my point of view, I think we should be creative and use multiple techniques to give notice to the town. In terms of the, including balloons, I think it should be considered. Maybe it should be rejected, but I think we should consider everything. I'm concerned about the EIR issue that Lee mentioned in terms of how do you create one if you don't know what the visual effects are. I think these cherry pickers should go up at each corner. I think it should be orange netting to show both height and mass. I think that a surveyor should verify the location of these cherry pickers and the netting so that it's accurate and it's no disrespect to the developer, but I think we should just verify the nature of this project. I don't think we should skimp in any fashion in terms of what we use here to provide notice. I am concerned about the timing and whatnot, but and my last point is I think maybe the hours should be expanded. We should include perhaps Saturday so that people that aren't commuting at those hours can pick it up on a Saturday. And maybe last point, in terms of the when we put them up, 3 to 4 weeks, I think before the Planning Commission considers it, and also 3 to 4 weeks before the Town Council. So I don't know if it's just one as presently proposed, but I think it should be on 2 different segments. And again, it gives the people, the community, a second shot to consider what's going up before the council votes on it. That's it.
Questions from Mr. Shepherdson? Seeing none. Last call. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing. Look to council for questions of staff. Councilmember McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. I had 2 questions of staff as follow-up from comments that I heard. I'm trying to think of an EIR in town or elsewhere that I've been involved with in other communities where there have been story polls as part of EIR assessment on aesthetics. I can't think of any. Is that something that's standard that I just haven't run across?
No, that's not something that's standard. we're doing photo simulations that are specific models that the metadata actually is plugged into a model, and then it's also our consultants able to analyze it based on that information to determine its accuracy.
Okay, and then my second question is just to reconfirm on the timing. I thought what I heard was it goes to Planning Commission twice, starting in January, and then comes to council?
So there would be, when the draft EIR is available, a notice of availability will be sent out, and in that 45-day comment period, the Planning Commission holds a hearing just to solicit input from trustee agencies and or the public on the draft EIR itself. They don't take any action there. Then it would, after the 45 days is up, there'll be a response to comments, and then it will go to the Planning Commission for a final action, which in this case would be a recommendation to the council, and then subsequently go to the council.
But considering what day it is right now and knowing what the Planning Commission has coming up on its agendas, that 45-day period when their comment is not going to be in December, is it?
Highly unlikely, but it's a possibility. It depends on how long we,
Yeah.
Because the hearing for the public comment is anytime within that 45 days.
Right.
So it could be real close to when it comes out, or it could be towards the end.
Yeah, but again, knowing what they have coming up, I just don't see how they can jam that one in. That's all my questions of staff.
Okay, other questions of staff? Vice Mayor Spector.
Thank you. Sometimes you have to, not look at something theoretically, but also look at it, holistically, and this application has a history. Given that history, can you, with your professional expertise, think of any way that we could demonstrate to the public not only the height, but more of the mass, other than what is being proposed here?
There may be able to be more cherry pickers out there that string portions. You're not going to get full footprints of any buildings because there's public streets going through there, and we're not going to want that stuff across the roads. You still have to have access for, if there is some kind of emergency out there, for fire, paramedics, police. So I don't believe that there is a way to show the full footprints, even with cherry pickers at four corners for this.
Mr. Manager?
And as staff presented at the prior study session, we actually think it could be the combination of the physical on-site representation of cherry pickers for a project like this, story polls for others, as well as the photo sims, and that having both tools together creates that opportunity. Those residents and policymakers who want the physical on-site experience would have a representation that enables them to do some review, and then the independently verified photo simulations would provide another tool available to residents and policymakers for engaging those very important questions of height and mass.
Vice Mayor.
A couple more questions. First of all, in testimony this evening, the issue came up about that it's ineffective to have the renderings on Winchester Boulevard. And based upon the last time, I would tend to agree with that. Does staff have a suggestion as to where the Winchester ones could be placed so that they are more readily viewable?
So in the applicant's letter, you can see they've tried to pick a couple spots where in the photo sims, pieces of the building actually are in kind of breaks in the trees. I'm looking at the fourth one on the first sheet of those photos where you've got building 3, number 2, and building 2, number 3. So there's kind of pieces of those buildings that are in between those openings where they would be visible from this specific view, which is the off-ramp from Highway 85. So it's really trying to get locations that you actually will have some visibility through the trees. And I think that was one of the basis for the applicant's choosing of those locations.
And in terms of the Vice Mayor's question regarding the signage, the applicant in their letter proposed maintaining the 3 locations that were used for the prior site that were above and beyond what was required at that time by the town. We could certainly, at your direction, review those 3 locations and identify more prominent ones that would be more visible and accessible to the community.
What I was looking for, yes, is something where if you're on Winchester, you might actually go look at it as opposed to, walking behind the train tracks or something. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions of staff? Councilmember Leonardis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Wait until he's ready.
A proposal for one location where to move the sign that would be more visible.
Would you like to share that first, or?
South, so it's less conflicted by the train tracks.
So my question for staff would be, I saw on our future agendas somewhere tentatively around December 17th that we may have the revised story pole policy hearing. So just wondering why we wouldn't wait for that before moving forward with this, considering this project is in its early stages. We don't even have the draft EIR yet.
The tentative date of December 17th is the earliest staff target possible. We actually think it's more likely the revised story pole policy will come to council in January, as reflected in the staff report that was presented for this council item.
Another question, non-related. Just hearing the concerns of the public and knowing where this project has been before, and then hearing the input from Mr. Shank and the proposed idea of using the cherry pickers. It seems like a lot of effort to do that, and in the past I said, well, why not use balloons? And I know Mr. Shank had his concerns with the balloons, but suppose that you just took 4 corners of each building, which would be 16 balloons. You put the balloons up and you snapped a lot of photographs of the balloons. And of course you pick a day that's not windy or weather impacted. And then you have those 4 corners of the buildings, and you have those buildings in relationship to all the other buildings, so you can demonstrate the mass by filling in with computer simulation. I think, to me, that seems like the easiest approach, the most informative to the public, and probably the most cost-effective and least trouble for the developer. But I guess what I'm getting at here is we kind of have an idea before us this evening that may or may not depict and address all the public's concerns, and it also sounds like a lot of difficulty for the developer. So I'm just not so sure about moving forward with this in its current form.
Councilmember Brzezinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to make sure we're looking at what we're really directed to do tonight, and that's to consider the exception of the story pole policy to an alternative to the standard story pole installation. And that, to me, I think it's the way we have to direct ourselves, because this is our public document. It's not as if we haven't had discussion about story poles and evolving our story pole policy. You remember that when we were here before discussing story poles, we focused on the fact that in no other agency were balloons used. Okay, we talked about balloons before, but when we did the analysis, that was not one of the options. Options were story poles, as they are currently noted, particularly in residential or lower profile buildings, and simulations for larger buildings. And I believe that's probably, I don't think we're going to get much different response given the amount of research that we received when we did our study on story poles. As far as the proposal is concerned from Mr. Shank, I think it's a pretty creative way to do it. The idea that it gives a lot of flexibility. I mean, you can move those things around, you can raise them, lower them, you can, if at a certain point in time the proposal changes in some tweaking way, then I would imagine that whoever the operator is can move that thing over 5 feet and give you another reading. But I thought our concern was primarily with height, and I believe the Vice Mayor asked that question earlier on, that what we were concerned about out there at Albright when the first proposal came through was the height of the buildings. And at that time, we were looking at 85 feet. Now the applicants come back and said, I want 65 feet, and that's the maximum. We're not talking about HVAC, we're not talking about architectural, accoutrements. That's the maximum height. And so I believe the proposal, as we are hearing it, is to somehow deal with the fact that it's not feasible to do the 2x4 story pole complex at 65 feet, but we can achieve a 65-foot profile, and then supplement that with the photo sim. And I, for myself, I think I can if I've got a good, strong, solid horizontal at 65 feet, and then I can relate that to the photo simulation. I get a much better read than if I just have the photo simulation. But it's not one or the other. It's got to be both in combination. And so my feeling is that since we're only looking at this, it's not really an alternative. It is a kind of a unique proposal that we had not envisioned before when we were doing the story pole dialogue. That allows some flexibility, allows us to move, to change, to move away as traffic for the businesses demands. It gives them some flexibility that we don't usually have. I remember that when we did the story poles out there at the Swanson site, it worked really well because it told us that that second story element at the corner of Placer Oaks and the Boulevard wasn't going to work. And that was the main benefit to it, to the story poles out there. They really did tell the story, and it indicated that that was going to be too great an impact on the visual environment. Then the storms came along, and it all blew down. Well, I think for our purposes, we recognize the fact that we want to know, we want to see what this looks like. I want to see them out there sooner than later. I'd like to know right now what 65 feet looks like out there. I don't propose we do that, but I propose that, it's to our advantage to have an earlier read than a later read. And so I'm going to assume some things from tonight. 65 feet is the maximum, that the mechanism as demonstrated by the proposal will give us the 65 feet, that the photo simulations will be then supplemental to what the height shows us. And if we can do a video flyby, then that would be to our benefit. If we could do a model, that would be to our benefit. I believe we've had a couple of times when Len Pacheco has recommended modeling for purposes of seeing what the mass is going to look like in a smaller context. But the idea that we have before us an opportunity to actually establish the 65-foot height is something that I do find acceptable at this point in time, and I could support this as the alternative.
Thank you, Mr. Brzezinski. In our current policy, story poles have really two primary purposes. One is to depict mass and scale, and I think Mr. Van Natta made an appropriate comment that at this height, trying to put together story poles and nettings with the way we do it on a smaller building probably will not work. And I think Councilmember Brzezinski referred to what happened on the old Swanson Ford site when the weather came in, and whether this is going to happen in December or January, we're still going to have weather issues. And I have heard nobody this evening talk about how to better depict the mass and scale of this potential project other than what's already been proposed by Mr. Schenk. The other thing is, again, I agree with Mr. Van Natta that I find the netting to be lacking because you can see through it, which is why I've always preferred photo simulations. I think they're much more telling. The opacity of the building is demonstrated in the photo simulation. The other purpose, primary purpose of story poles and netting is for public notification, for people to drive by and say, oh, wow, there's something going on there. I guess I better find out what it is. Although I find it hard to believe anybody in town doesn't know that there's something planned for Albright Way, I think putting some cherry pickers up with 65 feet in the air with netting strung between them is going to certainly tell anybody that doesn't already know that something is proposed, and with the appropriate signage, and I agree with the concerns of the sign behind the railroad tracks, and I'm sure we can find some better locations, that the notification will be adequate. And again, I think as Councilmember Brzezinski said, putting those things up 65 feet will at least give us an idea as to the height as we look at it, plus added with the photo simulation. I'm not averse to a video drive-by, pardon me, Chief Seaman, drive-by simulation to see what it would look like as you drive by the project. So I think that the developer has come up with a creative answer that, from my recollection of what we were trying to accomplish when we did our first hearing on the story pole policy, I think this is in line with where we're headed. So I'll look to council. Any other discussion? Or Councilmember McNutt?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I think this is going to be a huge step forward in trying to explain to the community and illustrate in a way that everyone can understand what's being proposed there in terms of height. So I can support this with a few modifications. I do think it would be good to add a few Saturdays. It doesn't necessarily have to be all of them, but there are people there. Everyone's pattern is different. On the hours, I was Googling sunrise and sunset on my birthday in January just to see what that is. And sunrise is at 7:20, so I don't really see any advantage to going any earlier than 7:30. But sunset's at 4:40, and somebody mentioned that the sun does set early. So I would like us to give staff a little bit of flexibility in working with the applicant, not to be so stuck on these hours, because we don't know when this is going to come forward. Could be January, could be February, or the way things happen even later than that, so that it's an appropriate amount of time, morning and afternoon, depending on what the sun's doing and on that month. The signage out on Winchester, I would suggest that you look into a combination of some banners and some signage. So if you had some banners that had just a few words that called people's attention to going and driving in to somewhere that's accessible, like where my county library office is, for example, where they can actually park and get out of their car and see it and read it. I think that would serve both in terms of getting people's attention and making accessible the full design and all of the other pertinent information. I'd also like to see on the town website soon an FAQ that explains all of this, and then as soon as you have the signage available for Winchester, having a downloadable PDF of that so that a resident could print out those drawings that show the photo simulation, stand not in the middle of the street hopefully, but somewhere safe, have that, look at the cherry picker, and I think it would help them put those two things together and to visualize. And the video simulation, I'm very fond of those. We had wonderful one for the Honda site and for the other project up on Winchester. It really does help. I would not make that mandatory, but I would strongly encourage the applicant to think about that. And the orange netting it's funny because you know, every time we have a story pole, even if it's a little pop out on a second-story house, you know, that orange netting really does call people's attention to the fact that something's going on there. But I always feel like in some ways it's a false representation, because when we have something in the hillside, I remember there was one up on Foster where you could see the orange netting. Well, orange pops out against the green trees. Once you actually build a house and it's brown or it's green, you know, you never see it again. And I'm always trying to find that house up there that everyone was so concerned about. But it pops out when it's orange, but not so much when it's regular color. So it's kind of odd to be thinking that orange is going to disappear. But if you do think that orange on a 20-foot beam is going to disappear, a balloon is going to be totally useless, I think, in terms of conveying any kind of information. And that was all.
Okay. Vice Mayor.
Thank you. I've been making a list of all of these issues. First of all, there's no perfect answer here this evening, and listening to those of you who have testified, and listening to the applicant, and listening to staff, there's no perfect answer as to, one, depicting the height, and secondly, definitely no answer to the mass. So what I am going to be supporting this evening is the best that I have heard tonight from all the sources from which we have received information. With regard to, and that is going ahead with the cherry picker beams and netting. With regard to the hours in the morning and in the evening, I would also defer to staff to make that determination by looking at sunrise and sunset as a directing factor. I like the daylight saving or regular time that we're on now because I'm out at 6:30, and guess what? It is getting lighter, and I think that is a good thing, and it's something maybe we'll have the orange netting up earlier than 7:30. I think I agree the sign on Winchester needs to be moved further south or closer to the entryway, but in some location that is more user-friendly than where it was before. If attention is called to that by virtue of banners or publication on the town website, so much the better. I actually don't remember what the staff report suggested, but having the netting up 3 to 4 weeks prior to each of the hearings. So that would be each of the planning commission hearing and the town council hearing. I don't, quite frankly, if I were an applicant in this specific application, given its history, I might consider whether or not I might want to put that netting up before the EIR. I understand that it's not required, and I'm not going to make that part of any motion that I would support, but I just put that out there. And unlike the other people up here on the dais, I am not a huge fan of photo simulation or drive-bys. Based on my experience, in my, as Ms. McNutt says, my day job, those kinds of products are the product of their foundation. And so, as I often said when I have expert witnesses up on the stand, garbage in, garbage out. And so that's why I don't necessarily believe everything I see. I'm not saying don't do it, but I don't just take them as I see them.
Okay, I've heard 2 laundry lists. Does somebody want to put that in the form of a motion?
Mr. Mayor.
Brzezinski.
Do we have to make motion tonight? I think this is just to consider a request for approval Could I have clarification from staff?
I think staff would be looking for a motion from council that approves the exception as requested by the applicant with staff consideration of the council direction tonight.
Well,
Minimum, and if you want to specify the direction, that's all the better.
For purposes
But
of
we can go back and watch the tape to hear the laundry list of items. You don't have to go through each one of those.
Okay. Anything else? No? Then I'll be willing to make that motion. But it is inclusive of all of the discussion that took place tonight, and it is the approval of the exception to allow the cherry picker proposal as the applicant brought before us. But again, with all the other considerations, including the timing, the extension of hours, as well as the timing in terms of the initiation of this in the weeks prior to actual hearings on these various the committees and actually the advisory bodies, and exploration of not only photo simulation but also video, and anything else. I think those are the more important issues that were raised by council.
Okay, before I look for a second, Mr. Manager.
The biggest ambiguity I heard in the comments was the timing before at least the Planning Commission and Council decisive acts. I think the applicant proposed they would be up for 2 weeks prior to, and then I heard discussion of 3 to 4 weeks, and I didn't really know if the council discussion was for 2 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks before, or changing the 2 weeks to being 3 to 4 weeks. That was an ambiguity that I think there could be a discussion between staff and the applicant what was meant by council on that point.
Okay, well,
so I would ask clarification
Mr.
on that.
Persinski, as you're making a motion, do you want to put that into the motion? And then
I heard 3 to 4 as more the direction of council rather than the 2 weeks. I never heard the council say 2 weeks was going to be the optimum. And if anyone in discussion would like to talk to that, that would be fine.
Vice Mayor?
I heard 3 to 4.
Okay. Do we have a second on the motion first?
Second.
Okay. Thank you. Now, any further discussion? Do you need it narrowed down more than 3 to 4, or is that adequate?
Staff is interpreting that we'll work with the applicant, that the cherry pickers or lifts will go up 3 to 4 weeks prior to the Planning Commission hearing and stay up till the Planning Commission hearing. And that's how we're interpreting the language.
As well as the council meeting.
And the council meeting during the time specifications.
Okay. Vice Mayor?
Mr. Persinski may have said this, but I don't recall. The applicant had suggested Monday through Friday. When he spoke, he said he would extend it. People talked about Saturday and Sunday, then it seemed like the wait was Saturday. Is that in our motion?
Yeah, when I indicated extension of days, that was the intention, and I was really focusing on Saturday.
Okay. All right. Councilmember Leonardis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one quick question here. So what would be the total amount of the cherry pickers? Is there going to be 16 depicting all 4 corners of each building? It's going to be 2 per building. What?
Staff's interpretation right now is nothing beyond what the applicant requested of 6. I haven't heard council discussion suggesting more at this point in time. 6, is that the correct number, Joel? Correct. 1 for the parking structure, 5 for the 4 buildings.
I'll wait for the Vice Mayor to double check.
Well, I did double check, and it is 5.
All right. Further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed?
No.
Motion carries 4 to 1. That's the last item on our agenda for this evening. Council stands adjourned.